Today, on Issue at Hand, after 75 years, Wonder Woman is getting her first live-action theatrical movie, and it's about damn time. This is Issue at Hand, Polygon's show about the weird world of comics, and I'm your host, Susana Polo. And today, I'm talking about Wonder Woman, her fictional history, her non-fictional history, and how it took us into the year of our Lord 2017 to finally get her a movie.
Is there anything else you want to show me?
I've been covering the Get Wonder Woman a Movie beat for more than half a decade now. Batman and Superman have a dozen film incarnations between them, while Wonder Woman's first appearance in a major motion picture was the Lego Movie. Jonah fucking Hex got a movie before Wonder Woman did.
Hey Hex, what happened to your face?
I've heard all the excuses people use to explain that when they're trying not to admit that it's institutionalized sexism. Bye to all the folks who are closing this video now that I've said those two words. This is Wonder Woman. What were you expecting? People have told me that the personal life of Wonder Woman's creator was too strange for Warner Brothers to want to make an adaptation of his work, when the company certainly hasn't balked at adapting the work of Alan Moore, who worships a snake god he admits isn't real. People have also told me that the bondage themes in Wonder Woman's early stories make her unsuitable for the big screen. They should really take a look at the earliest stories of Batman and Superman, where Batman used guns to shoot criminals and Superman couldn't fly and wasn't an alien. Superheroes evolve. But the most frustrating excuse I've heard is that Wonder Woman doesn't have an iconic origin story. Well, it's easy to have an iconic origin story when we've revisited it in a major film event once a decade for almost half a century. Look, Wonder Woman's creator did have a non-traditional home life, and his Wonder Woman stories did use bondage and submission as major themes. But the idea that her origin story doesn't have a mythic simplicity and audience appeal simply isn't true. All superheroes get their origins tweaked over the years, but here's the rundown on Wonder Woman's. On the magically hidden island of Themyscira, the immortal Amazons have sequestered themselves from the chaos of man's world for thousands of years, forming a highly advanced utopian society. But despite her people's happiness, Queen Hippolyta longed for a child so strongly that the goddesses took pity on her and breathed life into a doll she'd formed from Themyscira's own clay. The child was named Diana, and she was raised as the daughter of all the Amazons, tutored in the ways of war, philosophy, and compassion. Diana was beloved on Themyscira, but it becomes clear that her destiny lies elsewhere. In some versions of the story, a military plane from man's world crashes on Themyscira, and its sole survivor, Steve Trevor, warns of a great evil about to overtake man's world. Nazis. The Amazons hold a tournament to find a champion to escort Steve back to his home and defeat the evil. Queen Hippolyta can't stand to lose her daughter and forbids Diana from competing, but Diana enters anyway, winning the tournament, the title of champion, best of the Amazons, and her superheroic powers. In other versions of the story, the contest is held because signs and portents indicate that an Amazon hero will be needed in man's world to defeat a great evil. No plane crash required. Often, Diana volunteers to leave Themyscira as its champion, even though at the time it means that she can never return. In any case, once she sees the horrors of man's world compared to the utopia of Themyscira, Diana takes it upon herself to guide man's world towards the Amazon way, as an ambassador and a hero known as Wonder Woman. And to do that, she uses several items and blessings from the Amazons and various Greek goddesses. Her indestructible bracers, for the bullet deflecting, her super strength, and her golden lasso, which compels anyone bound by it to tell the truth. Often she can also fly and talk to animals. And sometimes she has an invisible jet, but don't worry about it. Wonder Woman is often associated with Batman and Superman in acknowledgement of her prominence in the DC universe, a triad known as the DC Trinity. The three of them represent the science fiction, mundane, and magical sides of the DC universe, as well as somewhat different philosophies on being a hero. Wonder Woman follows strict Amazonian philosophies on pacifism, forgiveness, and criminal rehabilitation. But unlike Batman and Superman, she has often been depicted as someone who is willing to kill for the greater good, once all other avenues have been exhausted. As longtime Wonder Woman writer Gail Simone once said, "If you need to stop an asteroid, you call Superman. If you need to solve a mystery, you call Batman. But if you need to end a war, you call Wonder Woman." Wonder Woman was created in 1941, the dawn of the superheroic era. by William Moulton Marston, a psychologist and the inventor of the systolic blood pressure test, a major technological component of polygraph machines. A year before, Marston had given an interview in which he'd spoken positively of the educational potential of comics, and it caught the eye of Max Gaines, the head of what would eventually become DC Comics. Gaines hired him to be an educational consultant, and Marston pitched his idea of a superhero who conquered with compassion more than with fists. The idea to make the character a woman has been attributed to Marston's wife, Elizabeth Holloway Marston. Marston was already a guy who surrounded himself with women who were ahead of their time. Elizabeth Holloway was also a psychologist and an attorney, with 3 degrees to her name, who'd collaborated with Marston in his research on blood pressure and emotion. Marston's research assistant, Olive Byrne, was the niece and daughter of pioneering pro-choice crusaders Ethel Byrne and Margaret Sanger, 2 women who founded America's first birth control clinic, an organization that eventually became Planned Parenthood. Marston and Elizabeth shared their relationship and, for a time, their home with Byrne. Both Byrne and Elizabeth had children with Marston. Elizabeth even named her only daughter Olive after Byrne. And Marston was publicly candid about his beliefs that related to his marriage. He thought that if men cultivated the ability to willingly submit to loving authority, a trait the society already expected of every woman, the world would be a more peaceful and happy place. And he thought that a good way to practice that ability was through bondage play, sexual or otherwise. All of this came out in his writing of Wonder Woman. Marston's stories are easy to read as explorations of his philosophies on bondage and submission games. But Marston also explicitly created Wonder Woman as a role model for girls and women, saying, "Not even girls want to be girls, so long as our feminine archetype lacks force, strength, and power. The obvious remedy is to create a feminine character with all the strength of Superman, plus all the allure of a good and beautiful woman." It's important to state here that Wonder Woman wasn't the only female comic hero of the World War II era. But after the end of the war, comics struggled to find a new niche without Nazis to punch, killing off a lot of anthology books full of femme fatales, jungle goddesses, and plucky reporters. At the same time, the society that encouraged women to take up factory jobs for war production turned face, telling them to give up financial independence in order to keep house so that returning soldiers could have their jobs instead. This regression in women's independence trickled down to anxiety over the sort of characters that were suitable for little boys and girls to read about. The death knell for a lot of female action characters was the Comics Code Authority. By the way, if you want to read more about these characters, consider this my endorsement of Mike Madrid's Divas, Dames, and Daredevils, Lost Heroines of Golden Age Comics. So Wonder Woman wasn't the only female superhero of her time. She was just one of the few who survived. And even she barely made it through the Silver Age. Marston wrote his final Wonder Woman story in 1948, and subsequent writers would tone down her stories a lot. 20 years later, with sales slipping, her character was almost unrecognizably revamped. She was stripped of her powers, her costume, and her connection to the Amazons, and her place in the Justice League. Instead, she became a private investigator, a fashion shop owner, and occasional secret agent. That era continued until around 1973, when feminist activist and journalist Gloria Steinem inaugurated the first issue of Ms. Magazine by putting Wonder Woman on the cover in her full costume, protesting the depowering of the world's most famous female superhero. But DC had another reason to give Wonder Woman her powers and her role in the Justice League back, other than public complaints. She was about to get her own incredibly popular television show. A decade later, the Crisis on Infinite Earths allowed DC to hit the reset button on Wonder Woman's history, and legendary writer-illustrator George Perez gave her a slightly tweaked origin story. Perez's story removed the American warplane and Steve Trevor from Themyscira in favor of godly portents as a plot motivator, but most significantly, it made some serious changes to the origins of the Amazons themselves. Perez's Amazons were created by Greek goddesses as a race apart from man, to guide humanity towards loving worship of the gods. Each Amazon was created with a reincarnated soul, the soul of a woman who was killed by man's fear and ignorance. Their queen, Hippolyta, had the soul of the very first woman killed by man's misplaced rage. And much later, when the same goddesses brought Diana to life, she was given the soul of that ancient woman's unborn child. But in ancient Greece, the Amazons' prosperity and power engendered jealousy among the patriarchal societies around them, and in response, the Amazons isolated themselves from humanity. Eventually, through trickery, Hercules and his army overthrew and enslaved them. Appealing to her goddesses for mercy, Queen Hippolyta was granted the power to overthrow their captors, but her sisters fell upon them in a vengeful rage, betraying the principles of wisdom, virtue, and love that they were created to uphold. As punishment and forgiveness, the goddesses gave the remaining Amazons the secret island of Themyscira and charged them to forever guard the unspeakable evil beneath it, forever wearing metal bracers to remind them of their time in bondage. In exchange, the Amazons were granted immortality. Wonder Woman's Perez origin story ties her closer to myth than ever before and underscores femininity as a source of her power, both with the Amazon's new origin and by removing Steve Trevor as the impetus for her hero's journey. The origin stood a significant test of time until the 2011 New 52 revamp, when it was revealed that Diana was actually just the daughter of Zeus, straight up. Your mileage may vary, but to me this is like taking the immigration theme out of Superman's origin story or the gun violence out of Batman's. It's not that you've completely changed things, but you're missing the point in a big way. Also, in the New 52, the Amazons were revealed to be murdering slavers at best and rapist murdering slavers at worst. But I won't get into that lest I go on a 5-minute rant about lazy storytelling, the social hierarchy of hyenas, and historical female warriors. This past year's Rebirth Wonder Woman is addressing the ups and downs of Wonder Woman's 2 post-crisis origin stories in a way that only comics can. And it's perfect for new readers to jump on. Written by Wonder Woman veteran Greg Rucka and beautifully drawn by Liam Sharp and Nicola Scott, the book takes place in 2 time periods. An origin story about Diana's first days as Wonder Woman, and a modern story about Diana realizing that her memories of her life and the Amazons, the ones about her father being Zeus and the Amazons selling male babies into slavery, have been altered. She can no longer be certain of who she is, but she's going to find out. The first 2 volumes, The Lies and Wonder Woman Year 1, are already out in trade paperback, and I super recommend them. Wonder Woman is a metatextual paradox. She's one of the oldest still-running superheroes, one of the world's most recognizable symbols of female power. She's also a female character who has been largely written by men, for better and worse. She exists in a male-dominated niche of the publishing industry that's owned by a male-dominated Hollywood studio system still struggling to come to terms with the idea that female-led films will make money as long as they don't suck. In Rucka's Rebirth Wonder Woman stories, the Amazons refer to her lasso of truth as the Golden Perfect, and sometimes I think that's exactly what our culture forces her to be. She's a female character who's expected to represent all women in a way that her male counterparts are never expected to represent all men, and she's expected to do that in a way that won't alienate or bore what's still perceived to be a male-dominated audience for superhero stories. And more than either of her Trinity counterparts, Wonder Woman is a character whose presence looms much larger in culture than her actual stories do. In her 75th anniversary panel at New York Comic Con last year, Greg Rucka said, "Everybody in pop culture knows who she is, and nobody knows who she is. Everybody recognizes the iconography, but they don't understand the character." Here's hoping that her first solo film will do a bit of the work of bringing the character of Wonder Woman out of the abstract and into the real. I've heard all the exclusives, all the scloozies. A psychologist and inventor of the systolic blood, the origin stood a significant chest of time. Olive Byrne was the niece and daughter of pioneering Crow Preuss. Man, this is a long script.